Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, President Biden is kicking off a week-long trip overseas, speaking at the UN Climate Summit in Egypt today. What he said about America's role in the global fight against climate change and where he's heading next. Democrats and Republicans are in a battle for the Senate, with two states now reporting no one broke the 50% threshold. The House also hangs in the balance, with Republicans likely to win a majority, but not guaranteed. We have team coverage with the latest and what happens next. And the alarming new flu spike. The CDC says hospitalizations and deaths have nearly doubled in the last week. This as children's hospitals are already being crushed by RSV cases. What doctors are now saying about the holiday season ahead. But we begin with President Biden addressing the United Nations Global Climate Summit today in his first stop on a three-country tour through Africa and Asia. Biden says his administration is leading with a bold agenda to address the climate crisis, saying climate policy is good economic policy.
As the world's largest customer, with more than $650 billion in spending last year, the United States government is putting our money where our mouth is to strengthen accountability for climate risk and resilience. These critical steps are already locking in vital investments in our infrastructure, delivering lower costs for clean energy, spurring good-paying union jobs for American workers, and advancing environmental justice in our communities.
The president will also focus on China and the war in Ukraine and other major summits throughout this tour. ABC News foreign correspondent Marcus Moore is live from Egypt, and ABC News political director Rick Klein is in D.C. with more on this. Marcus, there seem to be two elephants in the room for the president going into this. One is the war in Ukraine and how that's impacting inflation and an energy crisis, particularly in Europe, and also the fact that control of Congress still hangs in the balance here in the U.S. How did he navigate that today?
Well, you know, he certainly wanted to get across the message that the war in Ukraine and the potential shift of power back home in the United States will not derail the country's efforts at reaching their goals in combating climate change. And I think that was the overall mood or the message that he hoped to deliver to the world. The COP27 summit brings people from all over, including world leaders. And so in the midst of his speech, he also tried to say that the United States is leading the way globally and trying to reach the goals, and that every other country should do their part at the same time to meet this very immediate and urgent crisis that has been unfolding. And certainly while the United States and other wealthy nations, superpowers, if you will, are some of the worst emitters, and yet they don't endure the worst of the consequences from that it's the smaller countries. He tried to relay the message that the U.S. will continue to try to support those countries through funds and also innovation as they work themselves to try to meet the demands that come along with this climate change crisis that's been unfolding here.
Now, Rick, climate change was a key issue in the 2020 election, but exit polls show it was far from voters' most important issue in this week's midterm. So what does that do for the president's prospects of delivering on the promises and the goals that he's talking about today?
A lot of it is going to come down to how the midterms end, and not knowing, as the president is abroad now, not knowing if his party is going to control the House or the Senate is a big deal. Functionally speaking, climate change legislation was hard to get through, even with the Democrats in control. With the Republicans in control of either house, and at this hour, it's likely that they'll control the House, you can forget about anything meaningful moving through the House. The House Republicans are going to disband the special committee on climate change, and it's just not going to be able to be addressed legislatively. There's a lot that he can do administratively, and there's a lot he can do over the ensuing 2 years. And I think it helps the president's hand, both domestically and abroad, that these midterms were not the disaster. Clearly, they were not the disaster that a lot of people thought they would on both sides of the aisle. The fact that the Democrats are still in the ballgame in both the House and the Senate counts as a major surprise 3 days after the voting ended. But bottom line is, it is going to be a much more hostile environment come January, no matter what comes down with control.
All right, Marcus Moore, Rick Klein, thank you both. And that battle for control of Congress is coming down to the wire, with key races tightening as more votes are counted. Republicans are just 7 wins away from that magic number 218. to get enough seats to flip control of the House. The Senate will come down to a few key races. Ranked choice voting will now decide Alaska's race after nobody got the majority there. That will almost certainly go to Republicans. Georgia's Senate race is headed to a December 6th runoff since neither Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock nor Republican Herschel Walker received more than 50% of the vote. In Nevada, Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is closing the gap on Republican Adam Laxalt. Only about 9,000 votes separate those two right now. And in Arizona, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly has a 6-point lead over Republican Blake Masters. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran has the latest from Phoenix. Hi, Terry.
Hey, Diane, the counting continues here, and there's still hundreds of thousands of ballots left to go. And officials here remind us there's nothing suspicious or incompetent about that. That's normal here because in Arizona, 90% of the people vote by mail. And every one of those ballots has got to be scanned and signature checked and verified by a bipartisan adjudication board. None of that can start until Election Day, and all of that is by state law. So this is normal. Overnight, 78,000 votes or so were counted and reported, and those votes really boosting incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. He now has about a 6 percentage point lead over his Republican opponent, Blake Masters. Masters would have to win a really overwhelming number of the outstanding votes. It's going to be very tough for him. Over in the governor's race, those votes overnight boosting Katie Hobbs, the Democrat. But this race is much closer. Kari Lake, the Republican, still has a real path to victory. They'll all come down to votes that were dropped off on Election Day. But Lake is out there now essentially spreading a vague rumor, dark conspiracy about the count, and officials have had to boost the security presence around the tabulation center where ordinary Arizonans will continue the ordinary work of counting the votes right through the weekend. Officials say they expect the result next week. Diane?
All right, Terry Moran, thanks. Let's bring back ABC's political director Rick Klein along with Galen Druk from ABC's 538 to break this all down for us a little further. Galen, day 4 of vote counting now, and some of these races are just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So what are you watching for?
So when decision desks make projections, they have over a 99% confidence level in those projections. And so we are not at the point yet where decision desks are calling either the Senate races in Nevada or Arizona and a lot of the House races in California, for example. However, it does look to people who are closely watching these vote counts come in, it does look like Mark Kelly will pull it out in Arizona. Again, you know, there are caveats around that. And it looks like it's going to be super, super close in Nevada, but it looks like Catherine Cortez Masto could also pull it out there, also the Democrat. And if that does happen, that means that Democrats will keep control of the Senate, whether or not they win the Georgia runoff. On the House side, it is still very close. But again, it looks, if you're watching the vote tallying closely, like Republicans will take the House. We have to wait to see all of the votes counted in California because there are a lot of competitive districts out there. But if Republicans do take the House, it's going to be with something like 222 seats. A majority is 218. That is so narrow. So in either the Senate or the House, which either party controls it, it's going to be super narrow, which means that neither party is going to be able to sort of appease, I think, the farthest left or the farthest right planks of the party.
Now, Rick, either way, Georgia is headed for a runoff. So how does it affect that runoff, whether or not power over the Senate, control of the Senate, hangs in the balance?
Well, I think the difference is going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, if you can believe it, Diane. If the question is the Georgia Senate seat going to determine control of the United States Senate, then you're going to see everybody and his brother spend money there. And it is going to be a crazy barrage of the last 4 weeks. If control of the Senate is not at stake, it's still a huge deal to lock down that seat for 6 years. But I don't think you're going to see nearly the kind of attention and the kind of money that's being spent. I think you'll be a lot of people that are starting to think about the next map. Look, it's a huge deal either in any event. Obviously, a Senate seat and a Senate seat in the South. But I think the Republican Party's relationship with Donald Trump and with Herschel Walker being as fraught as it is, it's not clear to me yet that the entire Republican establishment around the country is going to go all in for that seat unless it means control of the Senate.
Galen, when you look at candidates who had a Trump endorsement, election deniers, How did they fare? Are there any conclusions there you can form?
Yeah, so at 538, we have been tracking candidates who denied the legitimacy of the 2020 election since the primaries. And going into Election Day, about 35% of Republican nominees denied the legitimacy of the 2020 election outright, and then another about 10 or 12% cast doubts on it. A lot of those candidates were in the House, and a lot of them were incumbents, and many of them won re-election in very red districts. But we were looking more at competitive districts and candidates who really staked their candidacy on the idea of the election being stolen or their alignment with former President Trump. And what we saw, without any doubt, is that they did not do as well as sort of more moderate, more measured candidates who acknowledged the legitimacy of the 2020 election. You know, I'll point to a couple examples. Currently in Colorado, we're still watching Lauren Boebert's seat. You know, she's a Republican firebrand, to see whether or not she loses. That is a district that leans 15 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. And it's really competitive. I don't think anyone could have imagined that. Another district, Ohio's 9th, where J.R. Majewski, who was, you know, at the rally on January 6th, sort of staked his candidacy on similar arguments, going down in a district that leans 6 points more Republican than the nation. By 13 points, he's losing. So we really did see a rebuke to some of that extremism.
All right, Rick Klein, Galen Druk, thank you both. And George Stephanopoulos will sit down with Speaker Nancy Pelosi for her reaction to the midterm elections and potentially losing her position as Speaker of the House. That's Sunday on This Week on ABC. Meanwhile, doctors are urging people to get their flu shot as the CDC reports flu cases, hospitalizations, and deaths have nearly doubled in the last week. The agency says there have been 1,300 deaths so far this season. This comes as RSV cases are overwhelming hospitals across the country. Ariel Reshef is at a hospital in New York with the latest on this alarming flu spike.
Health officials with an urgent warning about the staggering surge in cases of the flu.
Here we are again, thinking about and planning for a surge that will be really hard for us to absorb over the next couple of months.
The rate of hospitalization for this time of the year, now the highest it has been in a decade. Flu season starting earlier and spiking more dramatically than usual. So far, the CDC reporting 23,000 people have been hospitalized, 1,300 deaths, those numbers nearly doubling since last week. Right now, the South getting hit the hardest, as the flu typically starts in the South and works its way north. But flu is on the rise across the country.
There's a lot of people who think that the increases that are happening now are because there's been a lack of exposure over the last couple of years.
And the wave of flu crashing on top of children's hospitals, already overflowing with young patients sick with other respiratory illnesses like RSV. Pediatric hospital bed occupancy at 78%, the highest level nationwide in 2 years. Kansas City mom Melody cradles her 9-month-old baby Micah, who has been in and out of the hospital for a week fighting the virus.
He was grunting and making a lot of noises when he was breathing, so we knew he was having some trouble.
Doctors expecting a tough holiday season ahead.
Based on what we're seeing, that we're still going to be pretty high levels of transmission around the Thanksgiving holidays.
Our thanks to Ariel Reshef. Coming up, the new documentary about summer camp for Santas now targeting diversity. We'll talk to one of those Santas when we come back. Welcome back. The holidays are approaching, and pretty soon you will start seeing lines for Santa just about everywhere. But where do Santas learn how to be Santa? A new HBO Max documentary is giving us an inside look at a Santa camp in New Hampshire where professional Santas, Mrs. Clauses, and elves learn their tricks of the trade. But this year, the New England Santa Society is also tackling a complicated and historic problem: the lack of diversity in the Santa industry. Take a look.
The New England Santa Society created a school called Santa Camp. It's starting to become more visible, and we're starting to do much more promotion of it. The issue we run into is that people just have a very specific idea of what Santa should look like. So, we have a lot of new Santas.
I want to be able to be Black Santa for other families. I'm going to be going up to New Hampshire to learn all the ins and outs of being Santa. Oh, it's definitely going to be a strange experience.
Levi is transgender.
Oh, Santa Levi, a.k.a. Trans Santa here.
And Santa Levi, who you saw in that trailer, joins me live now for more on this. I should say Levi and his partner Heidi have asked us not to use their last names for security reasons, so you won't hear me say that. But Levi, thank you for being here. When did you and your partner Heidi first start dressing as Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus, or Dr. Claus, as Heidi goes by?
Yeah.
And what made you decide to kind of take that leap and go full-fledged to Santa Camp?
Yeah, originally it was just a volunteer event for a school that my wife worked for, who were parenting and teen moms, and so they were bringing the littles in, and they wanted someone that they were familiar with, and so, you know, naturally I came up, because I had a relationship with them, and then, you know, through the documentary approaching us is when we really found out about Santa Camp, and we just thought it would be a good idea for us to go and find out what would help us improve, you know, being a Santa. So
now, in the documentary, you talk about what you would have felt as a kid to have seen a trans Santa. How does it feel to be that person now?
It's kind of amazing to have kids. You know, we had an event, which is in the film, where kids were just asking for things like acceptance. You know, I think Santa is this character that, you know, people ask for grandiose things from, usually, you know, like whether it's the death of a loved one coming back or healing a disease or something. And so I think for me to have that space for, you know, LGBTQIA kids to be able to ask for just affirmation for their gender identity.
Now, after Santa Camp, your community organized a Santa greeting that turned a bit controversial. There was some tension outside. What was that like for you when you found out what was happening outside, and what did that do for you moving forward?
If anything, it pushed me to do more, right? Like, it makes me want to be even more visible and create that space for kids. Luckily for us, we were really sheltered. Like, we weren't really aware of what was happening outside. Because our main concern with that was, are the kids going to feel that pressure from the outside? Are they going to see the protesters and things? And so we really wanted to make sure that the kids were going to be safe, that we were in a safe space. Yeah, I mean, it's really just given me that drive to want to do it more.
Levi, what do you say to parents who want to raise open-minded, loving kids, but just feel that they're too young right now to be introduced to a topic like what it means to be trans?
Yeah, I think, you know, in the film, when I talk about, like, it would have made a difference for me, because I think as a kid, I just didn't have exposure to transgender or what that meant for me. And so I think nowadays kids have a lot more exposure, right? And so they have the knowledge, they have the internet, they have, you know, the visibility. And so for me, it's just about, like, making sure that I am visible, that I'm aware. I think for parents, you know, like, I don't have an agenda other than to spread magic and joy like any Santa, right? Like, I think that is my main purpose, is just to spread joy and create a space where kids can ask for things that they wouldn't normally ask Santa for.
Well, Levi, we appreciate you coming in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And coming up, it is Veterans Day. When we come back, how one veteran and his service dog are helping each other. They're going to join me after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. On this Veterans Day, we are honoring those who serve our country, and I am privileged to have some special guests in studio with me today. Retired Master Sergeant David Crenshaw and his service dog, Doc, are here. Like so many veterans, David suffers from PTSD after serving 18 years in Iraq, but that's where Doc comes in. David says the service dog from Canines for Warriors has changed his life, and David and Doc are here with me now. Thank you both for being here. David, PTSD is a difficult thing for people to understand sometimes, and you say you have severe PTSD but high functioning. So can you talk about what that feels like to you and what it looks like from the outside?
So the best way to do is to start what it looks like from the outside. It looks functioning normally. You know, you're an everyday person in society. You're able to go to work. You're able to, you know, at least be with your family, maybe not to the extent that you really should be. But for the inside, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of worrisome. You're often worried about, am I doing what's right for my family? most of the time you kind of know you're not your true self, so you've always got that in the back of your mind. And then occupationally, you're out there at work and you're just facing the everyday dangers. For me, I was a former law enforcement officer, so that just amplified the anxieties that I always had, and I was bringing those anxieties home and ergo passing it off to my family unknowingly.
So from the outside, everything looks fine, and on the inside, you're suffering all this pain.
Yes, absolutely.
What made you decide to apply for a service dog from Canines for Warriors?
Well, I wanted to be able to advocate for myself, my own mental health, and I didn't want to be zombied out, as they say, with the when you're prescribed medicines. It really takes away from your feeling, and it almost kind of leaves you in the same sense that you were with PTSD, minus the anxiety, but now you don't have any feelings. So being able to get a dog, you know, it's unconditional love. You can't bottle that, unfortunately.
Now, when you see a veteran come home with a missing limb, right, that
Yes.
loss is tangible, that disability is tangible. How big do you think the problem of mental health is for veterans, and do you feel that they're getting the support they need?
Well, the big problem with the tangibles, right, they're easy. We can focus on that, we can fix that. The invisible wounds are what makes it the hardest part, right, because sometimes the veterans themselves don't know it, and then obviously others don't know it. So a lot of that, you know, the knowing is half the battle, as they say. So once you're able to recognize that, and I think we've done a good job at learning the signs and teaching veterans and service members what to recognize within themselves so that we can actually start to combat the PTSD that, you know, so many of us are coming back with, unfortunately.
And medication does help many people, and I think that's kind of easier for people to understand, but it may be harder to understand. How is a dog helping you with PTSD? So can you talk us through how your life changed once Doc came into it?
You know, it's unconditional love. I'm not being judged. I'm not worried about I'm not being stigmatized. That's the big thing that comes with mental health, is the stigmatism. And with that, he loves me no matter what. I wake up every day, I take care of him, I love on him, and he's gonna always serve me. So in that regard, you know, that's just a natural part of healing as the human nature aspect.
Do you feel like there are things that we as humans can learn from how dogs are helping you and others heal?
Absolutely. I mean, just walking around, you know, your building today, you can see the smiles put on your coworker's face just by seeing him and then touching him. You feel that difference. It de-escalates so much tension and anxiety, not just me. It does it for everybody, and that's the magic behind them, truly.
Hopefully we can all learn how to show each other that kind of love.
Absolutely.
Now, Canines for Warriors actually rescued dogs from high-kill shelters and trains them to be service dogs. What does it do for you to think about that being where Doc came from?
Well, it's really it's really touching in a way, because, and more so, again, you said most of them are rescue dogs, but a lot of them are on kill shelter lists. Doc was 6 months old when he was in a kill shelter, and seeing him and what he's done for me and what he's done for others, it's sinful to think that his life would have been cut short. So the ability to be able to save a life and help provide for a veteran is just symbiotic. And what's even more so, myself and other veterans have lost friends or other service members, you know, as a result of war. So being able to kind of recoup that loss, in a sense, by rescuing someone in need, it gives us that sense of purpose. And with that sense of purpose, it gives us direction, and we could, you know, be able to navigate life a little bit better than before.
It sounds like you both saved each other, and you definitely put a smile on everyone's faces in the studio today. Thank you so much for your service to this country. We owe you so much.
Our pleasure.
Doc, I think, is very relaxed. In case anyone's wondering if Doc is stressed, I think the answer is very clearly no. David, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us. I am Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis. There he is. Hi, Doc.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.